Hello, fourth grade. Today we're going to work on drawing conclusions. I'm in your textbook on page 608, your reading textbook. Okay, so draw conclusions. Okay, we're going to draw conclusions and monitor and fix up. Okay, so right here, the first bullet point. The small pieces of information in a piece of writing are called the facts and details. When you put these facts and details together to form a logical, well thought out opinion, you are drawing a conclusion. It is also called making an inference. Okay, and then the strategy is monitor and fix up. All right, sometimes when you're reading, you realize that you don't understand what you were reading. And if you think you don't understand the text, it's a good idea to reread it slowly. So go back and read it again. Okay, so let's look over here on 609, the man in the moon. Okay, let's read to the first point there where our first question is. When we look up and see, with the help of our imagination, a face in the moon, the question is not who we see, but what we see. Let's look at number one. It says, draw a conclusion from the first sentence. Is this piece going to be science or fantasy? It's a little bit tricky. Okay. The sentence talks about a face in the moon, so at first it seems like fantasy, but then it says what the face is, not who it is. And that sounds like I'm going to learn facts about the moon. I think this text will be a science article. So let's go on. For when we gaze at the moon, we are seeing craters, mountains, deep, narrow valleys, and wide open plains. Question number two, strategy. How does reading on to the next sentence help you to keep or change your conclusion? Well, as I read, I check to make sure I understand the text. If I wasn't sure whether this text was a science article, I could keep reading. The second sentence gives information about the craters, mountains, and other features of the moon. So now I know this text is a science article and not fantasy. The moon is a dry and airless place made up of rocks and dust. But when the telescope was first invented about 400 years ago, people had no way of knowing that there was no water in the moon. So when they looked through the telescope and saw the open plains, they assumed they were looking at bodies of water. They named these places mares, which is Latin for seas. Today we know there is no water on the moon, but the names have stuck. That is why these dry and dusty places have lovely names as Bay of Rainbows, Lake of Dreams, and Sea of Tranquility. So let's look at number three, skill. If you read these names without your knowledge of the moon, what conclusion might you draw? Well, I look at bay, lake, and sea. It makes me think that those are places that have water in them, if I didn't know anything about the moon. But now I know that the moon does not have water. All right. Will you travel to the moon someday? Maybe. And maybe you'll come back and say, it's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. And when you finish, you have to go back and make sure that you understand everything that you read. Now let's look in your workbook on page 243 on drawing conclusions. Okay, and here we have explanation of drawing conclusions. Drawing a conclusion is forming a logical, well thought out opinion based on what you already know or on the facts and details in a text. Facts and details are the small pieces of information in a passage. It says read the following passage, then complete the diagram below by finding facts and details to help you draw a conclusion about Martin. Okay, so let's follow along with me as I read. On a sunny afternoon, while his brothers and sisters were outside playing, Martin stayed in his room, buried in a book about planets and stars. The ceiling and walls of Martin's bedroom were covered with stars. Martin made sure the plastic stars were placed in their proper constellations. For the school science fair, Martin spent weeks building a model of the solar system. The teacher said it was the most realistic model she had ever seen. She said it felt as if she were looking at the real planets. Martin told his parents that he wanted above all to become an astronaut when he grew up. So you have to fill in 4 facts and details and then draw a conclusion about Martin. So when we first read here, it says that Martin stayed in his room buried in a book about planets and stars. When it says he was buried in a book, that means that he was reading a book about planets and stars. He was very interested in it. So on number 1, you're going to put that Martin read books about planets and stars. because that's what you'll put number 1. Okay, and then we'll do one more, and then you'll finish the rest of the page on your own. So we need to find out another fact or detail about Martin before drawing a conclusion. So we can read about his bedroom. The ceiling and walls of Martin's bedroom were covered with stars. Martin made sure the plastic stars were placed in their proper constellations. So we know that Martin arranged plastic stars in his bedroom into constellations. So Martin arranged plastic stars into constellations on his ceiling. He made sure they were all correct. On his bedroom ceiling. So we could look at them at night. Okay, those are the first 2. Okay, Martin read books about planets and stars, and Martin arranged plastic stars into constellations on his bedroom ceiling. So now you have to fill in the next 2 things that Martin did, and then you can draw a conclusion about Martin, about what Martin is very interested in.